Hello, it is nice to be here, and what a wonderful kickoff to this amazing event. I want to invite our panelists to come on screen and join me, and we're going to have a wonderful session today talking about the remote workforce and economy and how the pandemic has impacted them and businesses. And we're also going to talk about challenges, but also some opportunities to really come out and thrive during this time. So I don't want to take up too much time because I want you to hear from these amazing speakers. And I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, starting off with Sophia. Can you give us a brief intro? Oh, I think we're having some trouble hearing.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm Sophia, the non-robot. My name is Sophia Swire, and I've been a serial social entrepreneur. Started off in finance and investing, and then spent many decades in places like Afghanistan and Pakistan, empowering women through digital literacy and other means to get them jobs and enable them to contribute to the economy. And more recently, I've returned to finance to launch a gender-smart investment fund called Gender Equity Diversity Investments, GEDI. And I made a pledge at COP26 to raise and deploy £150 million in badass female founders all over the world, delivering on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So delighted to hear Anne Cairns speak earlier about how crucially important it is to engage women in these global goals. Thank you.
Absolutely. And what exciting news to hear about what you're launching soon. And Cleve, we'll go over to you.
Good morning. Good morning. Oh my God. Good morning. It's truly morning. I'm Cleve Mesidor. I am the executive director for the Blockchain Foundation, which is an industry-wide education movement. I'm also an advisor to the Blockchain Association. I work in the blockchain and cryptocurrency space, which is not just transforming our economy, but it's going to be transforming our workforce as well. So I'm excited to be here to have this conversation. Previously, I served in the Obama administration as a presidential appointee, where we actually discussed some of these issues and focus on innovation and entrepreneurship. So it's great to be here to talk about how we prepare for the innovation economy and the innovation workforce as well.
Yes, absolutely. And Dr. Anino, we're going to go over to you.
Hello, everybody, and hello especially to Cleve again. It's been quite a while. Sophia, Angie, and to Kimberly. Delighted to be here. My name is Anino Emuwa, and I'm the founder of Avandis Consulting, which is a strategy and financial advisory firm in France, with an office in Lagos, Nigeria. My passion is about advancing women in leadership, business leadership. And I'm the founder of 100 Women at Daos, which is a global community of impact-focused women leaders, as well as the Africa Women CEOs Network, which is a community of women CEOs, founders, and heads of organizations in the continent. I also sit on several boards, including the boards of tech companies and smaller businesses, and very much active in the entrepreneurship space. And delighted to speak a bit more about that through our conference today.
Wonderful. And Angie, we'd love to hear from you too.
Hi, everybody. And I am also delighted to be here. And I think I could just listen to all of you and I'll just sit back if that's okay. I am the CEO of Visible, which is a digital-only wireless carrier here in the US. We're a division of Verizon. So I've spent the last 20 years at Verizon in different roles, but really excited about building a new disruptive brand kind of against the industry from within, which is quite fun. So.
Absolutely. Well, before we get started, I wanted to mention a couple things to the audience. One, as you're listening to this panel and to all of the panels today, really listen for that one nugget that is going to stand out to you. It could be one, it could be four, but listen to that one thing that you can go and apply today or tomorrow. As you're listening and taking advice and taking in these notes, it helps to have a North Star. And so really will help keep you grounded throughout this process. And I realized I didn't introduce myself, but I'm Kimberly, a senior program manager within Amazon Studios on our diversity, equity, inclusion team. And I've done a lot of stuff with launching really startups for entrepreneurs within Amazon's ecosystem. So just to get us started, we're gonna go straight to our first question is right about the pandemic. So we all know the pandemic has been difficult and challenging, if not traumatic. And there are even stats that show, people with lack of access to digital information, innovation, and technologies, it's been that much more difficult. So I do want to ask this to our panelists. What do you make of the pandemic reaction? And more specifically, how can women entrepreneurs become even more resilient during this time? Or has there been any tips or tricks that you may have to advise women during this time? And I think we'll go in reverse order. So Angie, we'll come to you first.
Okay, sure. I think for me, and how I've looked at the pandemic and the impact, fundamentally, I think we'd all align that it just probably exposed the truths out there, the continued inequities that were there already in caregiving and in income, and when trade-offs had to be made, mostly because of the lockdowns and schooling from home, family support. Frankly, women were always, or all too often, at least, in the position that were the ones that had to give up. It was like a Sophie's choice kind of moment, for families. But when your income is lower, if you have to make one trade-off. And so I think those natural inequities that were already there, or unnatural more aptly, just got heightened and more exposed during the pandemic, and disproportionately then impacted women, because women disproportionately take on a lot of the home work. And so I think that was it really heightened those inequalities and those realities in an ugly way. The flip side of that, however, is that I think as we're getting back a little bit more to normal and hopefully sustain that path for some time with school and those elements in the household, the other thing that the pandemic did, in a heck of a test case, is proved that flexible work arrangements and not needing to be in the office every day is fully viable. And so I hope we are able to lean into that more, providing more opportunities for women to advance and excel, because we can expand that pool of talent. That I think there was a feared trade-off before of not being in the office as much. I think there's a cultural side of still needing some human connection, and we can't lose that. So how do these hybrid environments work, and make sure that that people that are choosing to be home more often, their voices are still heard? And from an entrepreneurial perspective, I'm in a big corporation. You have to be entrepreneurial within it. We're kind of startup within that. So the other panelists are going to be probably better to speak on the entrepreneurial side. But the other thing I think is we need to understand what you want. I think there was also a lot of people that took a step back to reevaluate what was important to them, and realizing kind of the chase might not have been there. And I think that's probably a good thing overall too. But we can embrace different goals for people's lives and make sure that they don't have to completely give up their careers because it's an all or nothing kind of game. And I think that's one of the things that I've taken away, in making sure that we elevate the voices and have flexible work arrangements, and really have the discussions with what people want. And in a corporate environment, we need to do that, or we won't have the talent we need to move us forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you made some wonderful points, and I do want to open this up if there is a panelist as well who feels like maybe some advice on this topic as well. Dr. Emuwa, do you have any thoughts?
Sure. As Angie said, of course, the pandemic really revealed, the issues to do with the digital divide and worsened them. But also, it showed us how important digital technology is, and how key and critical it is to have women very much part of it, to have equal access. And especially from somebody who comes from a developing country as well, the issues to do with connectivity also are some of the issues. And I think that what we're looking at is not looking at women as a group that is finding solutions, but that this is a whole economic issue for everybody to solve. So we're looking at governments and private sector, especially the big tech companies, to work together to say, look, it's no longer all about shareholder capitalism, it's stakeholder capitalism, right? And women, whether they're in the developed countries or developing countries, need to be part of this. So some of the solutions are actually about also the role of government, tech companies, and other organizations. But having said so, to women, I'll just simply say this, is that technology is no longer about a sector. Technology is not just driving, it is not just shaping, it's also driving everything that we do. And we need to make sure that we do get those digital skills, which not only will help us, but would also help us to scale our businesses faster and also more efficiently, and to reach more customers.
I love what you said. Technology is no longer just about a sector. It really has expanded really beyond that. And so thank you for sharing that. And Sophia and Cleve, Cleve, it looks like you want to jump in. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with Dr. Emuwa, and it's great to be on a panel with her again. We've collaborated, and she's such a wonderful champion. And I just wanted to echo what was just said. Professional women were the greatest casualties of COVID, right? And that's what fueled the Great Resignation, because professional women had to take care of families, parents and children, but also reassess, their careers. So I believe that actually forced women to thinking more about entrepreneurship and how they use their expertise and the domain that they're in and their body of work, where to bring it to. So when you think about, professional women executives, the innovation economy is something that I think during COVID, they had time to explore, they had time to consider. So when we look at, entrepreneurship and this next iteration of it, it's actually going to be very interesting, especially when you look at, Verizon having a startup within it. Entrepreneurship is part of the future of work, but also the future of our economy.
Absolutely. It is here to stay. It is not going anywhere. Sophia, I would love to get your thoughts on this. And then I want to ask you a question around funding and resources. But do you have any thoughts on this?
Absolutely. So when the pandemic first broke, I moved from London to Dorset to take care of my aged mother, and there was no internet access. Vast swathes of rural Britain are beyond the digital divide. And I feel that, unless this is addressed, that this is going to create a new kind of poverty affecting literacy and education rates, and also income generation opportunity, not just for women, but for all Brits, basically. So I think that more needs to be done by government as well, to roll out high-speed internet access, to make sure that we don't have these divides happening also in the developed world. I've spent most of my life in places like Afghanistan, where, of course, it's an endemic issue as well. So on the positive side, we've seen a huge shift towards online business in the last couple of years. 5 years of growth in e-commerce was concertinaed into one year last year. So I think many of these e-commerce businesses are very suited to women who may have alternative sort of occupations, such as childcare or elder care. And these are things that you can run from home when you've got time and so on. And also, if you do have high-speed internet and you can code, then you can be employed remotely. You can become a very active member of the gig economy. So women who historically may have been excluded from the workplace through, mother care, childcare, whatever, are now able to have flexible working hours and to earn a living online. And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like creativity, really thinking outside the box, challenging, asking yourself, what if? And then in terms of your career and profession, and then going in pursuit of that. Thank you for that. And Sophia, I want to come back to you. During this time, we've seen lots of people get creative with how they fundraise and how they're managing resources or lack of. What's some advice that you have for female tech professionals or any founders when it comes to raising and a fund or lack of resources?
So you're right. The last couple of years has been really difficult for female founders in particular. Last year in 2021, global venture capital and private equity funding dropped to 2% from an already excruciatingly embarrassing 2.8%. And there are multiple reasons for that. One is that, there was a certain amount of trepidation about working with new managers and startups. Where there is instability, the habit of the financial market is to go towards more conservative choices. So most of the VCs that are overwhelmingly men deployed most of their capital in later rounds of companies where they were already invested rather than take on new risk. And that did apply for new fund managers too. There was a far lower appetite for risk, and also they couldn't meet you, so most VCs want to meet the founders, and that obviously wasn't possible in the early days. So the solution, if you're a female founder, I think, is to reach out to gender lens or gender smart venture capital networks or firms like GEDI. We're not registered as a fund yet, so I'm free to sort of speak about it in general terms. But we've already attracted more than 600 female founders before we've officially launched, who've reached out to us through social media, LinkedIn, and so on. And I would encourage female founders to leave no stone unturned. The flip side of all of the sort of small amount of funding that's going to women currently is that there are a plethora now of emerging female managers. And if you're a female on an investment committee, you're more than twice as likely to invest in other women. So I would say seek out female investors. And, we're an all-female GP with a rock star team of advisors and venture partners who are sourcing deals for us and helping to us evaluate them. And then eventually they'll co-invest with us or through us. And I'm very proud to say that Dr. Anino is on our board and is a fantastically positive influence. So seek out female investors. We understand that women communicate differently. We understand that women sometimes lack the confidence to ask for what they're worth. And I think you'll find us very friendly and open to speak to you.
Thank you for that advice. I mean, it's straight to the point, and thank you for those statistics as well. I hadn't heard many of those. And Dr. Anino, given that you're on the board, do you have any words of advice for female tech founders during this time when it comes to resources?
Yes, I do. First of all, the news has been quite depressing in terms of the amount of funding going to female founders during COVID. But recent data has shown that the amounts have increased recently in the last 1 year. So there's a much more awareness about the importance of investing in female founders, not because it's a social good, but because it actually makes business sense. What we're also seeing is the rise of female venture capitalist funds raising large amounts of money. For example, we had Katie Horn of Horn Ventures, who's just raised 1.5 billion into the metaverse. Now, whilst we might not be aware of her own strategy, but just the fact that there's a woman out there who has raised that immediately brings diversity into that field. It immediately draws attention into the field of metaverse and into the Web3, right? So these are some of the things that we're seeing, really. And take it like homework. Raising money for anybody is hard work. It is something that you need to dedicate time to. And as Sophia has said, look for those funds, those investors that have a gender lens. And they're out there and they're looking for worthwhile investments.
And if I can add to that, Dr. Emuwa referenced Web3 and the metaverse, but another important component of Web3 are decentralized autonomous organizations called Daos. They're a great way to fund projects as well, because we know that, as has been said, women have to look to alternative sources of funding. It's very hard for us to get traditional VC funding. But and I believe it was said that leave no stone unturned. So DAOs are a great opportunity to fund projects without some of the cumbersome or ideas or visions. And DAOs are essentially cooperatives, right? Remember back in the day, you had 50 people, everyone put in $20. You create a governance for who disperses the money. But it's a great way to actually not just build a treasury, but also, build your network, right? Your supporters, your champions, your ambassadors. So think of alternative emerging technology options like that.
And Kimberly, I would just add from a corporate America side to this too. It's not just about seeking funding for entrepreneurs, but when I think about, corporations are certainly taking more active stances and need to do even more to make sure that the partners, the agencies that they are choosing to do business with, which are a number of these entrepreneurial organizations led by women, led by people of color, there are companies that, and most of us are taking active steps to make sure that we have a diverse pool of the companies and partners and agencies we work with. And I think that's an important thing to understand and reach into those companies that are committed there. They're there and they're effectively a source of business, maybe not the funding for startups, but the funding for keeping your business going once you have started. So.
That is a great point. Even at Amazon, it's really important. We push all the time, like who are our partners and our vendors, and who are we really, are we making sure we're reaching out to marginalized communities, right? And just because they're marginalized, they're doing excellent work, right? Doesn't mean anything less than. So thank you for adding that. I do want to shift topics a little bit and kind of talk about during this pandemic time, like remote work has emerged. And I'd love to learn, I'd love for all of us to learn, how has your line of work, how has that been adopted into your line of work, if it has or if it has not? Cleve, we can go straight to you for this.
Well, I work in crypto, so we were virtual before virtual became a thing, right? We actually have large companies with no headquarters. So decentralization means that we don't have to be headquartered anywhere, but because of regulation, we have had to figure out where to actually incorporate and actually reside. But for crypto, and I think for all emerging technologies, as we look at this wonky term called the fourth industrial revolution, most of these positions in crypto, in AI, in VR are virtual because we want to be able to access anyone anywhere, but because at least for crypto, it's a decentralized space. So we're doing a lot of outreach to make sure that people are not just aware of opportunities to work in crypto, but also to demystify it, right? A professional who's leaving her executive position, who may want to have a virtual position where they can still be creative and still grow, may not think of cryptocurrency, may not think those jobs are there. So I think the lesson for crypto is, even though we're virtual, we're innovative, great salaries, a great place for professionals, people are not thinking about that as an option, as a career path, as an alternative. So it's great to talk about it in this whole concept of remote work and encourage women to think outside the box.
That's an excellent point, and that's also why we're having this, right, to expose people. So thank you for bringing up that point. I do want to expand this question for the panelists in terms of how has remote work impacted your line of work, but also how do you lead a team, right, through this time? What has that looked like for you? And Angie, we'll hop over to you, and then Sophia, then Dr. Anino.
Okay, yeah, it's an interesting one for me, and I will be transparent. That's one of our values in Visible, that I think there's a lot of pros, and I think there's been some cons. And so we've really embraced remote work, being able to expand the talent pool and where you can hire. But there were some cons to it too, like the ability to just to function and have flexibility, and we don't need to be in the office every day, has certainly been, I think, one of the most important things. The struggle part, and the part that I think we're all kind of grappling with, which is where, us at Visible, we decided to go to a more hybrid environment, but very much a remote first version of that, is, there is a culture part that's harder to build. And so you have to be quite intentional about it. But we also, talking to some of the younger talent, and I've said this about when I was in my 20s, which unfortunately wasn't that recent past, but when I was younger, my social life was a lot of work too. And so it's harder to replace that in that connectivity of the human side when you're completely remote, and remote becomes almost just like work is just work. So we've actually decided to do more of a hybrid environment in like 6 hubs across the US at this stage to say we want teams to be able to go into the office if they want to have that separation of their work from home, but also to have social spaces to meet up. And it's not every day. It's not dedicated 2 days a week. It's not even that. It's probably 1 day a month minimum. But a lot of people are going in, what I find in my office here in Denver, every other day, every day, because they like the human interaction. So I think it's having choice has been an important part of what we've learned, and to provide those spaces to allow people to thrive in the way that they need to thrive. But alternatively to that, when you do have this kind of hybrid environment, you have to be hugely intentional as you lead to make sure that the voices that are in the office and the voices that are on in a remote setting are equally heard. And we all have a role in that too, when you are remote, to make sure that even if you're not as comfortable, like popping on camera and talking, I always say like a well-placed question or comment in the chat sections of these meetings can actually be even more powerful than someone's live voice. So find the way to make your voice heard when you're in a remote environment, if other people are in the office and you don't happen to be there, or find the way to just to make sure that you continue to be present and actively engaged in every meeting. And because it's easy to be distracted too and multitask, I think, even more when you're at home. So those are all the things that I'd say we've learned, and we're going to continue to evolve, and this is going to pivot as the workforce process too.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Sophia, do you have would love to hear from you on remote work, but also like leading a team through this time.
So for me, it has been a very interesting couple of years. I've been a remote worker now, a digital nomad for maybe nigh on 20 years. So there hasn't been a huge shift in the way I do things. But the fact that it's becoming the norm is really helpful, because it's how I like to work. And as a VC founder, traditional investors used to insist that you all work together in the same bricks and mortar office. But after 2 years of remote working, these big institutions like the European Investment Fund or the British Business Bank are seeing that virtual teams can work, they can be just as effective. And that works for us particularly because we're a global network. And so remote work means that we can tap into the best in education, the best in climate action or mental health and well-being, the best expert in blockchain, AI, etc. We're not limited to working with people who happen to live an hour's drive from us. I met Anino online. I met her through LinkedIn, I think, originally, about a year or 18 months ago. And I believe that we developed quite a sort of close working relationship before we met in person. And when we met in person, which, if I remember rightly, was under a Christmas tree in London a few months ago, it was as if we'd known each other forever. I mean, it was just a sort of natural, fluid and fluent thing. And Anino and I have also been a part of another extraordinary group, which is linked to GEDI, Future Brilliance, my nonprofit. And we use the same network to raise and deploy $500,000 to evacuate hundreds of vulnerable Afghan women out of Afghanistan. And we did the whole thing through a WhatsApp group and Zoom calls. So I think that, it's been an extraordinarily disruptive time, but also presented incredible opportunities and different ways of doing things for the future.
Absolutely. Dr. Anino, we want to come and ask you a question. And I also want to, how have you led through this time? What does this remote work look like for you? And also any kind of encouragement that you may have for individuals, like as we're approaching time. Would love to hear from you.
Yes, well, the first thing is that it allowed me to work from home without explaining why I was working from home. So that was a good thing, the first thing. And so for my team, that was fine because, we already worked, remotely and globally without a problem. However, it did affect us in the sense of with our customers, because consultancy, some clients wanted to see you face to face. So we had Zoom, but we hardly used Zoom. So that allowed, clients to migrate very quickly. So that was good. But I think one of the biggest changes that we're seeing, which is important, is this working from home to hybrid working, because working from home in many ways has actually not benefited women because they've had to work and have care responsibilities, even more care responsibilities sometimes. But we're moving from working from home to flexible working, right? And I think that is where the future will be. And because flexibility allows parents, to be able to have that time to be at home as well. And so the care responsibilities are not just shifted to one parent. So I think that is the way we should be going towards a flexible working, really.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know we have about 5 minutes left. And so would love to hear from each of you. What's some words of encouragement? There's been a lot of opportunities that have come from this time in the pandemic, lots of creative thinking. What's some final thoughts that you'd love to leave with the audience? Angie, we'll start with you and then work our way back up, at least from my screen. So Angie.
Sure. I'm going to share something I've kind of shared a few times, and it's how I try to do my life every day. And I call it my 3 I's. And the first one is to be inquisitive, to be a student of your business, your industry, the broader world, constantly learning. Number 2 is to be intentional. And I think this is probably the hardest one, but to be really intentional with your time, your priorities, with your words. Your impact is a direct result of your intent. And number 3 is to be inspirational. It's important to be inspired for yourself and for the others around you, and be someone who truly believes in what's possible for the future, and reflect that energy for you and your team.
That's amazing. And Dr. Emuwa, any final thoughts?
Yes, final thoughts. In technology, the future is really exciting. Whilst the diversity in the new emerging technologies is still low, and certainly at leadership levels, but there are so many more opportunities for women now, and I think we should grab them. And I'll just say this one example that Cleve would know is when we see what has happened in terms of the NFT drop of Women of the World recently, that having that inclusive digital asset, which is all about having women of all types represented. We've seen people and friends who have invested, who have bought NFTs, right, simply because of that. So it's rapidly becoming an inclusive space, and there are many opportunities, but we have to make that first step, and we need to learn what is it's about. And there's so much out there we can learn, we can be part of it in some form or fashion. It's creating wealth, and women need to be part of that.
Amazing. And Cleve, any final thoughts?
Yes. Just to build on what Dr. Emuwa just said, we have to look to emerging technologies as we're looking to transform entrepreneurship, the future of work, because it's blockchain, but it's also artificial intelligence, virtual reality. But as we look at remote work, right, there's a lot of consideration about, is it right for the worker? How can we make sure they have a great experience? We have to remember that it's hard for supervisors too, and we have to make sure people can manage in a virtual environment, and that will actually be critical, because I know people struggle to manage teams in a remote environment. So I think we have to make sure that we're thinking more about that in terms, as we think about how do we ensure that people can work from home, how do we ensure people can manage virtually as well?
Absolutely. And Sophia, any final thoughts? We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. If you care about the planet, if you care about sustainability, and you care about profit, invest in women. So not everybody has a huge amount of money to deploy. Not everybody can become an LP in a fund, but everybody has a little bit, and you can join an angel network. You can deploy small sums across a number of female founders. Female founders, once they are invested, are more sustainable, they're more profitable, and they also exit faster. In fact, last year was the 11th year in a row that female-led businesses went to IPO or sold to different corporates. And so, invest in women. We are going to change the world. We have to step up both in business, in politics, and in entrepreneurship. If the world is to have a future, look what the blokes have done to the world. We've got to step up and step forward.
Thank you. I hope you all can join me in a virtual clap. Sophia, Cleve, Angie, Dr. Emuwa, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us, your words of advice. We heard creative thinking, intentional outreach, be inquisitive, be intentional, be inspirational, or be inspired. Thank you so much for sharing your amazing thoughts and words with us. I think we're good we're set, and I hope that you in the audience was able to hear a few things that you can take away and really apply from this amazing panel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you.